This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. Today we are going to be doing a big history lesson on some of the lesser known stories of the Pacific Theater during World War II. And we're going to talk a little bit about how some of these items are researched and how the information gets to you. For that, I've got two great guests here. One's co-host, John Simpson. You've been on the show a bunch of times, but if people haven't heard you yet, give a little bio on you. John is a veteran of the U.S. Army and joined their special forces in 1978, becoming a sniper instructor there as well in 1985. John later retired from the Army in 1994. He is an instructor with Sniper Craft Incorporated, and most applicable to today's topics, he is a research historian. Also, John has authored several books on the fundamentals and advanced tactics of marksmanship and sniper skills. So welcome back, John.
Glad to be here.
Our guest today kind of reached out to me from, I guess you saw some of the veteran episodes I was doing. So really pleased to have you here. It's going to be Jenny Chan. And just a little background on Jenny and the organization she's here representing. So she is one of the founders and current director of Pacific Atrocities Education based in San Francisco, where she and her team focus on shedding light on some of the most overlooked events of World War II in Pacific Asia. Her work highlights the stories of comfort women, the atrocities of Unit 731, and the occupation of Hong Kong. With a background in historical research, Jenny has scanned over 1 million pages at the National Archives and authored books on the hidden histories of Chinese comfort women and occupied Hong Kong. She has cultivated an audience of 34,000 history enthusiasts and social justice supporters and hosts a podcast frequently joined by James Bradley, where they discuss untold wartime narratives. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much for having me. And your veteran stories are very interesting on your podcast. The little that you've been doing recently, I saw on Instagram. They're pretty eye catching. So great job.
Oh, thanks. I'm slowly learning how to use AI and do some of the video stuff. But the John helps with getting some of those veterans on the show, and then on the Canadian side, I have Ben Click. So I actually work with Ben's son. We were on the gang unit up here together, and he's helped. He's hosted some of the Canadian episodes. But yeah, I really love telling some of the stories that are out there, and just kind of getting into a little more of the nitty gritty. This year, like John helped with, we had the wives on. We talked about some different aspects to history with some of the episodes. So we went a little different direction than just having the soldiers on to tell their stories. And that was super cool. And but thank you for reaching out, because I mean, the work you're doing is just as important. And I think people are going to get a lot from this episode today. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I just want to talk about James Bradley too. A lot of people forgot who he is. He wrote The Flags of Our Fathers, which then became like a Clint Eastwood movie. And the point of his story is about PTSD, and then also raising money for the U.S. military while his father was facing PTSD. And then he went on to write about Flyboys, which was a very interesting story. I don't know if you guys know about the story that of Chichijima incident. 8 airmen were captured by the Japanese and were eaten by the Japanese during World War II. And then the 9th one that escaped was George Bush. And then later he went and visited Chichijima with George Bush to verify that this happened. And there was like a secret wartime trial that George Bush, because he used to work with the CIA, he was able to get that like declassify for James Bradley to write his second book on World War II flyboys. And so that's why I think that like he's the perfect person to go and like sometimes co-host my channel Pacific Front Untold.
Yeah. No, I'll have to reach out to him and get him on here too, because if I can help share those stories, I mean, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. I can actually I can just CC you in an email and then talk about that.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
introduce you guys. Yeah.
Well, you know what? You have a fascinating story, though. Let's get into how you got into this world of doing all this research and the historian type work. I know you had told me a little bit about this, but let's dig a little deeper on that. So wherever the beginning is for you, feel free to start.
Yeah. So growing up in Hong Kong, I spent half of my childhood in Hong Kong and half in San Francisco. And when I was in Hong Kong, when I was a little child, I used to love watching anime and like reading manga, comic books. And my grandma would tell me, "Oh, those Japanese are terrible people, those turnip hips." And I was thinking, wow, maybe my grandma is just racist. And one time she's like a little bit of a hoarder, but one time she tossed away like my whole collection of like manga comic books. It was like 2 boxes that I have saved up from all my red envelope money to actually go buy. So I was like, it really left a deep scar in me. And then when she passed away, and she was always telling me about like 3 years, 8 months, like Hong Kong suffering under the Japanese and whatnot. And when she passed away, we found this box of like military yen and rice rationing coupons. So I thought, well, maybe actually what she was saying is true, right? Like there were these like military yen with Japanese writing on it. So it's like and then later I found out that like her family had to trade in a lot of their belongings for like these military yen and whatnot. And so I reached out and then I was starting to like try to research more about what had happened in World War II, especially in Asia. And there were just like a few books like The Rising Sun by John Toland and also The Rape of Nanking. But then the more I read about it, the more it didn't make sense, because if the Pacific War in Asia killed like 30 million people, then what do you think about like the Rape of Nanking is only like the tip of the iceberg, because there's only 300,000 people. So then I started researching more into like what had happened in between like the Rape of Nanking and also like 1945. But then I realized that it even started like from 1931, where like Japan occupied Manchuria, and that really started out a lot of the Japanese brutality. And then I read The Death Factory by Sheldon Harris, which was fascinating. In it itself, if you read between like first and second edition, there's like huge difference. The first edition, he claimed that there were Japanese experimenting on Americans, and then the second edition, you can notice that he took out that whole part of the book.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and so I started like trying to see like why did he take out that part of the book. And it's very recently, like I say 6-7 years ago, when I was like scanning when I was like trying to digitize all these pages from Unit 731 in the National Archive, that I realized that there was a Congress hearing after the first edition of his book. And all these politicians came to the conclusion that Americans were not human experimented on. And then kind of like asked him to take that out of his first edition. And so that's why his second edition, that whole part of the book was gone.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, but his first edition is actually more accurate, because Americans were human experimented on. They were captured in Mokdan, and this is like part of what is so fascinating about record, trying to like find record and record keep, because like you can see that like certain politicians would like to cherry pick records and like cherry pick history and to fit it into their narrative. But then if you dig deeper into like those things that they're like, oh, it didn't happen, then you can find that like the narrative, the story that's behind that narrative is actually false.
Yeah.
Jenny,
Yeah.
could you, for the benefit of the listeners that aren't familiar with it, could you give a brief description of what we're talking about when we say Unit
Yes.
731?
Yes. So Unit 731 was a biological lab in Manchuria when Japanese captured Manchuria from China, and China was facing like a warlord era at the time. And they, Ishishiro, a Japanese scientist, established a biological weapons lab where they were doing human experimentation
Mm-hmm.
on and vivisection on human beings, and also trying to test out what is the best way to develop weapons. So some of the weapons that he developed include anthrax, glandor, how to like poison, basically just really nasty stuff. He figured out how to powderize anthrax. He also had these fleas bombs
Mm-hmm.
that he used ceramic bombs, and then he put fleas in there so then it can like spread the plague. And he started out kind of innocent. Because in well, not that innocent. Japan was going through a war with Russia, and so he basically saw the need of Japanese military needing clean water. So he developed this water filter, and he peed into the water filter in front of the emperor as like a I would say a tech demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
And he drank his own filter pee, and then he said, and then the emperor was actually very impressed and was like, wow, if you can make this water filter, who knows what else you can make. And then the emperor gave him funding. And when he was reading the Geneva Convention, he said to himself, he thought like, wow, if it's so important that like germs and chemical, that these people need to write rules about it, then I need to harness and make it into a weapon. And that's how like he started all these research. At first he started it in Tokyo, but then when he realized that like in Tokyo, it's just way too out there in the
Mm-hmm.
capital, people might find out. And when Japan captured Manchuria, he thought, well, this is actually the perfect place, because Manchuria is all the way out here. And no one is going to find out if I'm doing this.
So we'll come back to all the stuff about Unit 731. I want to just make sure we do talk about your research though, and how you actually got into some of these topics. Because you mentioned your grandmother, but once you started reading, like how do you pick what you're going to focus on? Because a lot of the work on your website, and as we kind of mentioned in the bio, so you have the Comfort Women, Unit 731, but I bought some of the books that were listed on your website. And even when you're reading through them, there's Unit 100, and then there's all these other units and all these other different aspects kind of going on all at the same time. And, just how do you choose what you want to focus on? Is it just kind of personal interest? Or is there like a specific connection you have with these specific stories?
So to be honest, the Chinese comfort woman thing topic that I chose was because I saw on the news that like there were these Chinese comfort women, and I don't know if you've been to South Korea. South Korea is every Wednesday they have a protest against Japan, and from U.S. media, we always think of Japan and South Korea as like buddies.
Mm.
And so then one time I was vacationing in South Korea, and then my Airbnb host invited me to go and protest because it's Wednesday and she's going to protest, and I was like, oh, why?
That's just a regular Wednesday for them? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, she was going to Iowa University, and she said, yeah, every Wednesday we protest in front of Japanese embassy about comfort women. And then she was telling me about Korean comfort women, and then I found out there were also Chinese comfort women. And then when I was reading into their stories, there was a book called Chinese Comfort Women by Oxford Press, and it was not that well known. And when I was reading it, I realized that there were still a few people in Shanxi that were still alive from that era of serving as comfort women. And comfort women were sex slaves, basically, for the Japanese Imperial Army. And so I just went and
like comfort women is the term one side uses
right.
to, I guess, I don't know if downplay if is the right term, but to kind of lessen their involvement or what they might have been doing.
And I thought with the Koreans are still having such a strong emotional attachment to this, there must be like some story here. And so I thought, well, since there's like Chinese comfort women, let me go and talk to those people because I can't really speak Korean, but then I can speak Chinese. So I went and talked to them. And it was such an emotional trip that it took me like 2 years to finish the book. Not because like it's so hard. I mean, one of the stories that like one of these women told me was that like she was basically like gang raped 10, 15 times a day. And then afterward, she was pregnant. And then she went to um the case. I mean, her mom knew about it, but it was such a taboo topic in Asian culture that like her mom and her bury her baby inside this like cave. And then I visited the cave afterward. I was like, wow, this is like emotional. And so like it was such an emotional journey. But I knew that I had to tell the story. And so that's why I did that research. Just because it's such a like an emotional thing. But going back with like Unit 731 and all the other research that I've done, um, it's because there was such a story inside the story with for example, Unit 731 and like occupation of Hong Kong, which we're going to dive into later. Like, is not only do you have an occupied land and that then an invaded land that was then being used for human experimentation and whatnot, then you have also this like post-war cover-up story, which then it led to like even Sheldon Harris, who wrote the book in like way after the war, it was kind of like censored in a way. So that to me was very fascinating. And then while thinking up like Unit 731 and like Philippines, for example, then we find like stories in between that are never talked about, either for political reason or just make people look bad.
Well,
And
that kind of brings up some of the stuff that I was talking about in the veteran episodes. And when we had one of the research or the historians from the Canadian War Museum, and we were just part of our discussion was on how we tell our stories. So during the war, what's being told, but then also after. And we were kind of comparing Canada and US and just how like the US almost built a whole industry around it, right? Movies and TV shows. And it's like we were saving the day and we're doing all this great stuff. Whereas on the Canadian side, it was like a way different feeling. And there was a lot of conflicting, or people were, there was a difference between French Canadians and English Canadians and how they felt about the war. And people weren't really willing to tell our story. So it was kind of like they were beating themselves down. And then it was hard to get memorials after. And people are like, well, why should we put these up? And it just between Canada and the US, there's such a difference in how we tell the stories. And then the same thing comes up when I was reading some of these books on Unit 731 and doing some of the research for this podcast, just how the stories are told. And obviously, Japan's going to tell it a very different way than China's going to tell it. So, it's just, you got to get both sides of the story, or there's 10 sides to a story. Like, who knows?
yeah, and what's interesting is that like post-war Japan, because US was occupying then, so then a lot of the documents ended up in the United States National Archives, and not a lot of people know about that. That a lot of the Japanese documents then end up in the US. And what's also interesting is that like we recently did an interview with the son of Unit 1644, which was like the biological weapons lab in Nanjing. And even he didn't know too much about it. He said that, oh yeah, I've been trying to go to the Japanese archives and trying to dig. And the only thing that he found was like an album of names. And so there's like, even though that happened like 80 years ago, there's still so much to be discovered.
Do you have anybody that helps you with some of this research, or is this all on your own? And what's the funding like? Like how, I don't know, is all the trips you take out of your own pocket?
In the beginning, yes. Most of it was out of my own pocket. I used to have a job, and then I'm doing nonprofit full time. And so a lot of the funding comes from independent donation, people who are interested in this topic. I have a donor who used to work for the NIH, and I was talking to her about Unit 731, and it really resonated with her because for her, she was doing research for the United States, and she gets to see one part of the research, but then she doesn't get to see like the whole picture, and who knows what that research was used for. And then she was telling me like, then what is the ethics of science? Like how, if one day, or her students, because she was like a PhD, and then like, what if her students need to do something that Unit 731 like scientists need to do? Like, should they say yes just because if they say no, that might destroy their whole career? That's what like Unit 731 scientists were facing, right?
Yeah.
Like this whole network of scientists in Japan that were basically focused on doing biological weapon, and that was like emperor funding. So whatever that the emperor or this network of people, of scientists tell you to do is kind of like peer pressure.
Yeah.
So that's why she was like compelled to donate to our nonprofit, because it's not just like history, it's also like learning from history.
Okay. Why, and I kind of got some of this answer from reading the material that you have, but maybe for listeners too, but why do you think some of these stories do get missed outside of people just trying to do a full-on cover-up and destroying documents? But, even when we tell some stories, like, again, going back to Canada and the US focus very much on the positive side of things, not necessarily always telling, here's all these horror stories of like missions gone wrong and different things. So, what do you think, like, why are some stories missed out there? Is it cultural, why people pick and choose to focus on certain aspects? Like, what leads to that?
That's a great question. I think there are like a lot of contributing factor. Classical Japanese, like Japanese during World War II, is very different than like occupied Japan, like post-war Japan's language. Post-war Japan's language is more like westernized. So you have like katakana, that's actually directly from English. But then classical Japanese is more like inspired by Chinese. So then, like, for example, if you take a Japanese person from 2026 and bring them back to like 1939, that Japanese person might not understand.
Yeah.
The language from like
world.
90 years ago. It was a different world. And so there's language barrier. And then secondly, I think like not a lot of Americans realize that America was losing the war in 1943. I would argue that America was basically losing in 1943 because a lot of the soldiers were captured by the Japanese and then shipped to do house ship and like slave labor in like all of these territories. So not a lot of and then afterward, after they win in 1945, I think it's almost like a national mythology. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. It's almost like they want to create this national mythology image of America winning the war. And number three, I think is political. All the cover up, and because after the war, um, United States needed Japan as an ally to fight against China, to fight against communist China. And what's interesting to me is that this Chinese Civil War actually happened like right before World War II. But then because China needed a united front, And so the United States poured billions and billions of dollars to Chiang Kai-shek, the KM
Taiwan.
Kuomintang.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically he eventually moved to Taiwan, but not a lot of people realize that like he was fighting the war and he moved the capital like a few times, and it's fascinating that like he was then kind of celebrated as a hero, and because he was funded by America, then we focus more on his story. We like um but then we don't talk about like what had happened like really in China as well because of the post-war relationships that America was having in the Pacific.
hmm You know, I guess one of the things, and just to sum it all up, it's like we want to give people, or I would think we would want to give people the whole history, the full 360. And you know, I get there's time limitations and there's funding limitations, and we can't have a movie on every single thing or a book on every single thing. But it's yeah, it just feels like there's so many holes to history in general, and it's messy. And I think, you know, when we talk about like on the political side, sometimes they want to paint it a certain way and leave out, you know, something going wrong or something that might make them look bad. But it's like, you know, okay, well, people are going to find it out at some point. And then you just, you know, it's going to come up, and you're going to get labeled with it. So it's like, why not just address it at the time and be like, yeah, you know, war is a dirty business, and there's things that go good and there's things that go bad. And even some of the decisions, like, you know, we got to make a decision in the moment, and it's going to cost you know, lives. But this is the best of the worst of what we got. So I feel like,
Can I chime in? I
yeah,
recently started reading this book, Why Leaders Lie. And it's so fascinating because it's not like a president is going to go into election time telling like, oh, I'm going to bring the whole country into a war.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And so it's very like, it's very grim. But at the same time, I think that's why media lies. Like, I don't watch the news anymore because like all this narratives and it comes from all sides. I think during the Spanish American War, Hearst was even saying like, I'll supply the story, you supply the war. So
hmm
that's yeah.
yeah,
which was also recreated by Orson Welles in the movie Citizen Kane.
yeah.
That
Right.
that scene was actually recreated in because the character of Kane was supposed to be a avatar for William Randolph Hearst.
Right. But a lot of people don't realize that. They think it's just some kind of like, you know, movie. It's not based on reality, but
Yeah, there's
it's
all these
very
little
real.
Easter eggs in there, and you know, meaning behind different things. Well, maybe we'll get into some of the stories. So some of the things, the fascinating things that you've come across in your research, if we can, because we're on a Canadian show here, we can start with talking about the Canadians in Hong Kong. And this is something I had never heard of. I'd never learned about this in school. Um, you know, and I until recently when I was preparing for the veteran episodes at the end of last year. But you have some insight into this, Canadians defending Hong Kong. So can you tell us a bit about that story?
Yeah, that is actually a very fascinating story. A lot of Americans know about Pearl Harbor, but they don't realize that, like, within 8 hours of attacking Pearl Harbor, because Hong Kong is also in the Pacific, that they attacked Hong Kong basically in the same time.
Mm.
And the British had asked for Canadians' help, I think, in earlier in anticipation of defending Hong Kong. And Canadians said yes, but most of the garrison that they shipped from like places like Jamaica to Hong Kong have never seen battle.
hmm
They were more like garrison work. And I remember watching this YouTube video about this Canadian guy who was then later held captive by the Japanese. He was saying that he was basically playing football in Jamaica and he was not ready for battles at all, but was shipped to Hong Kong in like November of 1941. And I think Churchill had was under the impression that Hong Kong was not defensible because you know, the Japanese were coming anyway.
Well, they were outgunned from what I understood. Like when the Canadians got there, again, like you're saying, they weren't quite battle hardened. They're not training. They're not doing all these different things. The Japanese are coming in, and I mean, they're years into fighting wars. It's closer to home for them, so they've got air support. They've got all the reinforcement. All the logistics are right there. And then we just sent a bunch of guys, like a bunch of
Right.
just
And they were
fodder.
thinking like, oh, maybe if we send some guys there, it's going to be good for show.
Mhm.
Because then at least it shows that we're trying, and maybe the Japanese are going to be scared. I mean, if you read into like all these communication between these leaders, you're kind of thinking like, oh my gosh, are you guys serious? You guys are just going to send these guys there for show and to kind of show that like they're kind of ready for combat
Mhm.
when they weren't really ready. And I don't think that. And one of the correspondents from British Army was also very interesting. He was saying that like, oh, the Japanese have very small eyes, so they cannot see at night, so we can rest easy at night.
How wrong they were. Wow.
Yeah, because the Japanese were mostly attacking at night.
Yeah.
They were known for surprise attack. So I think the battle lasted between December 8th to December 25th, just because how and they also underestimated that the Japanese were they thought the Japanese were probably going to send like 10,000, but they sent out like 30,000 troops. And so that was, they were basically outgunned, and they weren't like battle hardened people. They
Mhm.
weren't, and it's very interesting because recently while I was scanning OSS documents, OSS was like a pre-CIA thing.
Mhm.
And they were doing like a survey of Hong Kong and like how they were going to take over Hong Kong. I mean, how they took over Hong Kong. Apparently, the Japanese were also working with Triad members. So then they promised the Triad members certain things. So then the Triad members would then, like during the chaos, help them rule Hong Kong and kind of become like some puppet ruler in a sense.
Yeah.
Oh, if you could just cover real quickly, what you're talking about when you say triad.
Oh yes, triads were like mafia gang members in Hong Kong. So
Mhm.
they're used to like, violence on the streets because there were already gang members. And so
Well, and you essentially have locals who know the
local
terrain.
thugs.
Local thugs, and they know the terrain. They're insiders now for you.
Right.
Well, the U.S. government kind of did the same thing during World War II with the New York Mafia keeping the docks open, and
Mm. Mhm.
I
so
didn't realize.
it follows a pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think local thugs, people underestimate local thugs. But like in during war, if the local mafia decided to go one side or another side, then it's actually going to be great advantage for that certain side.
Yeah. So what else have you kind of come across? Maybe you want to talk about Unit 731 and some of the stuff that some of the just frightening stories?
Can I finish talk
Yeah.
about the
Oh
Canadians
yeah.
too?
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
find it so fascinating. That Canadians then like capped under captive in afterward. I think like a couple hundred Canadians died during the initial fighting for like 2 weeks. And then they were shipped to like hell ships, and then they had to go work in mines.
Hmm.
And have you guys watched the movie River Kwai?
Oh
No.
yeah, Bridge over the River Kwai. Yes.
Yes. So imagine that some of those Canadians were also doing that kind of slave labor for the Japanese. Like for example, they worked at like coal mining in Japan, and they worked for like Nippon Steel Company. So they were like doing steel work.
Hmm.
So just because you lost a war doesn't mean that you're going to stop laboring, because the Japanese, whoever they capture, is either going to be it's either going to be under some kind of industry work. And it's also interesting because in I don't know how to describe this clearly. So when they bring the laborers onto the hell ship and then bring them into like for example, a factory, right? For example, the very well-known factory is like Houghton Factory. Have you guys heard about this Houghton Factory?
No.
It's in Mokdon and also in Manchuria, and that's what Harris Sheldon was talking about in Unit 731. That these POWs were captured by Baton Death March and from the American side, and then they were brought to Houghton to do slave labor, and then in Houghton, then they were used as like then they were captured again, whatever Japanese scientists needed to then bring them to do human experimentation.
Okay.
And so a lot of these Canadians also were captured to do slave labor. And what I've also found interesting in my research is that you're much more likely to survive a Nazi concentration camp than to survive, like, the River Kwai situation of doing slave labor for the Japanese.
Really? Wow. Well, wasn't there a story like, yeah, I think you, one of the podcasts I watched that you were on, and you were mentioning how like even the Nazis came over and wanted to check out what the Japanese were doing. And one of the Nazis came over. He was like, "These guys are crazy. Like people
Yeah.
think we're bad. These guys are worse." And then he ended up flipping sides or like saving some people.
Oh yes, that was during the rape of Nanking. One of the one of the international safety zone person trying to save people being killed by the Japanese. There, 300,000 people were killed in 6 weeks, and so he actually established the safety zone in Nanjing with other Westerners. And then he started writing home to like Nazi Germany, and he was like, "Yeah, this is crazy. Our Japanese friends are very brutal in Nanjing. Maybe we need to like reassess our situation and our friendship with Japan."
Huh.
And
Jeez.
it's also interesting because at the same time in Nanjing, American USS Panay was also being shot down. And the Japanese and this is the time when United States was not even at the war yet, and it was clearly marked a U.S. ship, and Japan just kept shooting it, and then kept apologizing, and then shoot it again the next day, and then apologize. So it's just kind of this like situation, very like they have surprise attacks, and then they apologize, and then they have surprise attacks again. And that can also be traced back to Russo-Japanese War, when Japan was doing surprise attacks on the Russians. But at that time, in like the late 1800s, Teddy Roosevelt greenlit it because he kind of saw Japan as like the Yankees of the East, and so, even brought Japan to like fundraise in Wall Street. So then, like, Japan can build their military industry. They just didn't realize that it would eventually lead to them being attacked at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that, speaking of people going and working in the labor camps or having the experiments done on them, I didn't realize that just the amount of people they had from different countries. So there was Russian people that they had captured. Was India in there? I think they had captured some people from India or.
I read some record that like, so Indians also fought in the Battle of Hong Kong, and like Battle of Hong Kong, it's very under talked about because only 4,000 people died versus like the rape of Nanking, 300,000 people died. But like that was actually the first battle where Canadians actually were fully fighting. They have been declaring war on the axis of power since 1939, but that was actually the first battle that the Canadian fought.
Yeah.
And Indians were also fighting alongside of the Canadians. And yeah, I remember reading in what was the book? Pacific War. I forgot the author's name, but they were also eating Indians and like for cannibalism. In some island in the Pacific, which was it's so wild that even happened, and then like no one talks about it now. It's okay, but yet we talk so much about Nazi atrocities. I'm not comparing atrocities, but it's just like, why do we forget about these stories?
Yeah, Yeah, no, totally.
Right. Well, I mean, because the thing is, it also, to me, it also relates back to one of the favorite American pastimes is like second guessing the Manhattan Project and the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. And it's like, oh yeah, there's this shame and original sin and all this other stuff. And the thing is, it's like, look, I'm not saying that one thing, hey, they did this, so we get to do that. But the thing is, it's like, uh, the depths of the degradation from the Imperial Japanese Army and the military is just not covered enough.
Right. And I don't want to get you into trouble since this is your show, but like
You can say whatever you want here. It's not censored. We're all good.
Hundreds of thousands of people would be killed per month if the atomic bomb was not dropped.
Yeah.
And the two atomic bombs kill less people than the rape of Nanking. When the rape of Nanking was by sword and bayonet and machine guns. So just the brutality of it. And that's just one episode of Japanese brutality. There are like so many more.
And if I could just interject one thing, it's so basically one of the experiments that I'm familiar with, one of the regular experiments that I'm familiar with Unit 731 is prisoners would be arranged in a circle tied to stakes. And in the center, because they were looking at weaponizing diseases, so they would have a bomb configuration with, typhus, okay, the fleas that Jenny was talking about before. And, the question is how do you get, how do you have a bomb that like explodes, spreads fleas, but doesn't kill the fleas so that they can give people typhus?
Right.
And what they would do is to determine the distribution of the bomb, they would have a ring of prisoners tied to stakes and the bomb in the center. And they would set this off with the live prisoners. And then they would monitor the progress of the disease where they were in relation to the bomb. Now, fast forward, just prior to the first atomic bomb, the Japanese were launching what were called balloon bombs.
Yes.
And they were these balloons with incendiary bombs, and they were traveling along the jet stream across the Pacific to the coast of the United States.
Oh,
and
really?
that's a whole story in itself. And they were normally equipped with incendiaries. And there was a project that Ishihiro from Unit 731, he'd been tasked with coming up with a typhus balloon bomb. And the initial launch had been delayed. But there was a bacteriological balloon bomb program in the works just prior to the first bomb being dropped on Hiroshima.
Actually, yes, that's actually accurate. And that's the cherry blossom at night. And he was planning to do that in California. But then recently, I started looking into Norihito archive with the U.S. National Archives as well. And they had already dropped bombs in places like Alaska with the balloon bombs at Alaska and also New Mexico. And then I read into why they were doing it in New Mexico. It was because they knew exactly that the Manhattan Project was going to be developing something there. And people I found these old newspaper magazine, and then on Jeff K also writes about Unit 731. And these old magazines from like these people living in New Mexico were describing like, oh, we saw hundreds of balloons and blah, blah, blah. And this is like, no one remembers this now.
Yeah. You said it was called the Cherry Blossom
at night.
And that was those were the ones that they were sending. They were trying to blow them up around San Diego,
California.
In California,
yeah,
okay.
Just anywhere. I mean, one of the balloons is documented that it basically landed among a group of a family that was picnicking, and wound up killing a bunch of civilians.
Yes.
Oh, really? Jeez.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was now in this case, one of the reasons why people don't know a lot about that is basically a lid was placed upon the existence of the entire program because the federal government was trying to convince Japan that the balloons weren't making it here. So it was hushed up that these incendiary bombs were going off on the western coast of the United States.
Wow.
And so targeting information was basically classified. And it wasn't until well after the war that the death of this family had been reported.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Jenny, what other stories have you kind of come across that aren't really getting out there? And do you have any other projects that you're going to start focusing on? Is there anything that's kind of piqued your interest going forward?
Yeah. So recently we come across this Yokohama trial. And one of the first, I think I mentioned it on this podcast, that like one of the first thing that got my interest was about like how different the first and the second
Hmm.
edition of Sheldon Harris was in terms of his book. And so I'm running this research, and I stumbled across this Yokohama trial, and the Yokohama trial was very interesting in terms of like they were talking about. My gosh, there's so much to talk about and and I'm just like, oh gosh, so many things just came to my head. Like, Yokohama trial was for Class B and Class C war criminals, so they weren't really, um, for example, like highlighted in terms of history.
Well, what's a Class B and C war criminal? I've never heard of that.
Class B and Class C means that you didn't really do mass murder. Maybe you
Oh,
kill
okay.
a few
Like
people,
abused
but you weren't.
prisoners.
Okay. So it's varying degrees of like
Yes,
Yeah.
it's just
how
varying
bad you
degree.
are. Okay.
Yeah, like the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor for
Hmm.
the law enforcement audience.
If it's Class B, Class C, maybe you killed a few people, but you didn't command the whole troop to kill like a couple 100,000 people.
Okay.
But you still did something. And I started reading into like all these nurses like testimonies and the doctors' testimonies of like war crime activities. I'm like, wow, what's going on that like nurses and doctors are now testifying?
Mm.
And we stumbled across the story about how near the end of the war, a crew of B-29 were going into bombing Tokyo, but then that crew got got caught in by the Japanese. A few of them died right away, and then the guys that were like captured by the villagers were then shipped to like Kyushu um, Imperial University, and they were human experimented on in front of a college campus, in front of a college lecture.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and that's Class B and Class C.
Jesus.
And it's so for me, it's like so mind-blowing because imagine if you were an airman and you were shot down, right? And then you're being rushed to a hospital. The logical thing that's coming to your head is like, oh, great, I'm being saved now. But
Yeah.
instead, they like remove a guy's lung and like try to see how long he would like live without his lungs. And like they were trying to replace like do like seawater experiments to see if seawater can replace saline and whatnot. And this is like in front of a classroom in Tokyo. So it's not just Unit 731. They were running human experimentation all over the Japanese empire.
Well, that's just crazy to think that civilians can just watch this. Like you're not you didn't sign up for this necessarily, I guess, but like they just wheel someone in front of you. I'd imagine most kids in university nowadays would just walk out, but they're there and they're watching this, and it's like, wow, the civilians are okay with it.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize this. And this goes back to the atomic bomb that Japan was going to fight until the last man. There was essentially no more civilians. And when I was reading this document, that really came to mind that there was no more civilians left
Hmm.
in this country. They were going, I mean, they arm these women and like these civilians with bayonets and whatnot and train them. Like everyone was going through this really intense like training on how to fight, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And with sharpened sticks.
Yeah.
Right.
That's insane though. Like you're just thinking like they're going to fight to the last person. Well, there goes your population. Like there will actually be nothing left of you. You just be wiped off the planet. So what other stories, what have you learned that you think people are missing the most? What are, whether it's a specific story or a specific set of stories, or is it just kind of the whole thing? Everybody needs to get more educated.
I think just the whole thing, people need to get more educated, and we need to realize that like when we're fighting a war, it's not like we're going to be like Hollywood, like you said about the media. It's not like a Hollywood style where everyone is dressed up and like going to here and going to there and like and it's like a beautiful thing on Hollywood set. It
Mhm.
is very ugly. It's disgusting. Like people are fighting on the street, like Manila Massacre. I didn't realize the amount of destruction until I started reading into it. And I mean, honestly, before I would say that I'm educated, but in college or in high school, I didn't realize that Philippines was a U.S. colony until I started researching into this. And it's also fascinating that, like, during World War II, the Filipinos were not, at first, when the Japanese arrived, they were excited. They were like, oh gosh, we're going to be liberated finally. And then they saw the Japanese brutality and then decided to fight with Americans. They were
Mhm.
like, oh, actually, never mind. We're okay.
Yeah. Thanks, but
and
no thanks.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
and at the same time that like when the Canadians were surrendering in Hong Kong, like they also did like Baton Death March, and then MacArthur left the Philippines. And in like within like the 2-3 years that the Filipinos had to fight by themselves, they basically had like no resources.
Mm.
They were so resourceful on how they were going to fight the Japanese. And that to me is like very shocking in turn. And I mean, until MacArthur came back, and then you have the Manila Massacre. So the whole Asia in World War II is a very fascinating and untalked about. Um, the whole, yeah, I think we all just need to learn more about it because there's so many people living in Asia, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, are there any Canadian organizations that you work with? Or do you
Yeah.
have like an equivalent up here?
Yes, I work with this Vancouver organization. I think their name is BC Alpha, and they on their website they have a lot of Canadians fighting in Hong Kong because I think the founder is a Hong Kong immigrant from Vancouver. So
Okay.
maybe you can interview her.
Yeah. I'm just writing it down here. I'll have to
Yeah.
look into that. That's really interesting. You know, so are you finding when you're looking into a lot of this stuff, are people pretty helpful, whether it's organizations or the government or whoever, or do you really just got to like dig on your own? Like, do you get a lot of support for trying to dig up certain things, especially if it's a narrative that might not be so favorable of whether
No.
it's the U.S. government or someone? Okay.
And it's very hard to actually dig things up because at the National Archive, it's not like they organize it in such a way that like you see a Battle of Hong Kong here and then you see whatever there. Like like I was saying that I was finding triads information in the OSS documents. So you
Uh,
never know. Like maybe one day you're digging into like a unrelated topic and then you come across something that's actually way more interesting.
Well, and again, going back to like preparing for some of the veteran episodes, I'm reading some of these books and I start learning about certain aspects of history that is like, wow, I never knew that. I'm reading a lot on foreign interference right now and all the stuff going on with like China and Canada and the politics and the law enforcement of it all. And, I've read a whole bunch of books and had people on the podcast talking about the history from the 60s onward, Trudeau Senior onward. And now when I'm reading some of these newer books, they're just like dropping in these like different aspects that are kind of connecting dots that were missing from some of the earlier stuff I was reading. And it's just like you're reading and you go along, and all of a sudden I'll see a bunch of names, but there's like a new piece to it. And it's so fascinating when you can connect all those dots. It's like the light bulb just goes on. And then you just start digging more. And it does get
Yeah.
addicting, like reading this stuff gets very addicting.
Yes, I agree. And yeah, it's fascinating because it's been like 80, 90 years. And for example, we're like the first organization to publish a book about the quantum army, who started the Manchuria invasion of
Mm.
China during World War II. And so it's like after 80, 90 years, there's still new information to be dug up. And like,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're just coming up to the end of our time. We're gonna have to get you back on and get some more stories.
I was going to say, we're going to have to schedule a part 2.
Yeah. Where can people find your work? Where's the best places to follow you, or if they want to donate or get in touch?
Yeah. Our website, pacificatrocities.org. And if they want to be like, sometimes we have some topics that we want to talk about that doesn't really fit into our blog or like a book, we go onto YouTube and do that, and it's Pacific Front Untold.
I'm sure John's got something like in all those books behind him there. He's got to have something that could help you out. So he's got tons of material.
Yeah, he's got too much of a head. I mean, generalists can't be the specialist, and it's been I've learned stuff just from this podcast, listening to her. I mean, it's having her on as a guest has been a very special treat for me, and I hope that we can have her back.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll say bye offline, but so hang in there for 2 seconds. But yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.